Welcome back to Awkward Insurance. I am not sure, Ashley, if we've actually ever talked about the very first episode that you and I did. I mean, actually broken down our feelings, or maybe my feelings behind that episode. In season 1, I think it was episode 2, even though for some reason, every time you tell it, you're like, I was the very first recording.
Because I was, and I think that it was too risque to be out there. So we had to start with something else a little bit less risky.
I remember, though, having the conversations internally with our company and even being called out on an all-company meeting to say, hey, we're starting a new podcast. It's going to be called Awkward Insurance. Dustin, why don't you tell them your ideas for the first couple of episodes? And I was like, oh, no, I have never said this word out loud outside of my 4 walls before. It's the 3-letter word that starts with an S and ends with an X. And your episode was called Let's Talk About Sex, even though that's not wholly what the episode was about. I think I stayed in this zone of how many more times do I have to say this word on a podcast or even to the company. So anyone that knows me would deeply characterize me as staying away from such topics. You can call that whatever you want to call it. I don't know. What do they call that? Pearl clutching? But Ash, you have less of a filter than I do, and you're way more daring than I am. So not only were you ready to talk about it, you have a whole article that has it all over the place. Oh my gosh. So I am so excited about today's guest. And let me tell you a little bit about how it got started. So we had a prior episode, and not even 24 hours after that episode, I received an email that said something like, I love the name of your podcast in all caps, which at first I'm like, why are you yelling at me? What did I do? But no, then it went on to say, but let's talk about a program manager that insures all things awkward. And I'm like, all right, I'm listening. So now I'm going to read this email verbatim. And then also let you know that when I sent it to my team internally, because of my own non-ability to say certain words, I redacted some of the words, even though I don't know that they had to be redacted, but I wasn't sure if they met corporate policy for being decent or not. Anyways, I'm going to read it verbatim. Okay, so it said, we specialize in writing tattoo and piercing artists, body artists, to medi spas who will
You can't even say it. Do you need me to finish the sentence for you?
Do you have the email?
I have, yes. All right, let's try this again, everybody.
I told you I can't do it.
We specialize in writing tattoo and piercing artists, body artists, to medi spas who will bejazzle genitalia, to pyrotechnicians who will light up the skies.
I had to turn my mic off.
Oh my gosh.
I was unsure. At first, I just kind of fell out of my chair and was like, is this a joke? And then I was like, okay. I got to tell the team. I was like, I'm not sure that I can send this email, but let me try. So I redacted it. And after a period of Mad Libs where everybody was trying to guess what was behind the black boxes, everybody was like, we have to do it. I'm like, all right, yeah, we have to. I really hope Ashley's available for this one. So without further ado, our special guest for today is Susan Etter. I hope I said that right, because I didn't even test it before we got on.
You're good.
Awesome. Susan joined PPIB. Took me a second to get that one out too. Or the Professional Program Insurance Brokerage. And she joined that organization in 2010, working her way to the role of president. And it's been said that she's known for her creative vision and underwriting detail, and that she possesses the ability to recognize opportunities often overlooked by industry peers. She collaborates closely with London carriers to specialize in curating some of the most distinctive and successful insurance programs for some of the more awkward exposures. Welcome to Awkward Insurance, Susan.
Well, thank you. That was a very, you can tell that I did not write that intro about myself.
I thought it was great. It was very buttoned up. I loved it.
Our business development manager is the one who sent that initial email to you, and she has been figuring out the wonders of ChatGPT.
Awesome. ChatGPT can definitely come up with some good bios. And then you're like, no, that's a little too stuffy. Can you add in this word? And it'll,
Right? And it changes it. So, well, thank you. Delighted to be here.
tell us a little bit about you and how you got into this market.
Well, for sure. So PPIB has been around for 30 years now. And I can't say I was the brilliant one that came up with this idea. It was, in fact, another Susan Preston, who is now retired. And it started with permanent cosmetic insurance, right? Because back in 1993, this was not something, even still to this day. You walk up to an insurance company and you say, I would like to insure tattooing people's faces. And they look at you like you have grown horns. So she was friends with a number of ladies who were getting into that procedure. And she's like, she had been working in insurance for years and like, oh my God, if you're going to tattoo people's faces, you really, really need insurance for that. I'm going to figure something out for you. So she went down the path of actually convincing a company that this was a good idea. And in fact, it is a good idea. And it kind of expanded from there. So you start with permanent cosmetic artists, and then they're like, well, you can cover me for this, but I am also doing all these other aesthetic things. Can you just add that in? And then they came to us and were like, we're doing all of these things. Now we need to cover our sister brother companies that are tattoo artists, because if you can tattoo the face and provide insurance for that, I'm pretty sure you can cover tattooing the entire body. And then, of course, tattoo studios have body piercers in them, right? So then that required a whole nother level. And it just kind of blossomed from there.
That seems to be how little small businesses go. They're like, let's start with this. And then they start adding on a whole bunch of wild other crazy crap. And
Yeah.
like before you know it, you've got a claim and you're like, I didn't know you did that.
Right away. Yeah. And I certainly never thought I would be in this industry, but I had started in personal lines. I've been in insurance for 30-ish years. It's been a long time. And honestly, I got to the point I have all the patience in the world for those folks that handle personal lines. Because if you can listen to someone calling and complaining that their auto insurance went up by $5 for 6 months and have to explain to them why
Oh
and
my
walk them
God.
off the ledge, more power to you. But I knew I personally couldn't do it anymore.
It's exhausting.
I'm struggling more with the agents that don't have the empathy for the $5 increases and how they just jump off the deep end. I'm like, listen, that could be somebody's prescription medication right there. $5 is a lot.
Yeah, but you get to know your clients, and you know which ones need that $5 per prescriptions and which ones have more money that they
Right.
know what to do with, and I can probably burn for heat the rest of my life. So
For sure.
And they get Starbucks every morning. So, but no, it was fun to transition into commercial insurance. And then, I was looking around and I kind of did the same double take you did. Their ad for employment was maybe not quite as censor worthy as the email we sent you. But when I applied, I was like, well, this is very different. I wonder what this is. Got in totally over my head. Started as a customer service rep in 2010 and got told that we'll slap your hand if you ever go too far. And apparently I never got my hand slapped because I took over a couple of years
Oh my gosh. So now I really want to know what's too far.
ago. It's a real fine line in this office.
I'd be afraid of that line.
Well, it is interesting that you felt you had to redact some of that information, before you sent it out, because with our carrier, we both have special IT permission for things that
Oh,
would
no.
not normally be acceptable on a work computer, but piercers very specifically are very proud of their work, and you don't know what you're going to see when you pull up a body piercer's website or Facebook page or Instagram, whatever it is. So we actually had to go through the process of getting some things not spammed out for
Oh
ourselves.
Oh my
no.
gosh.
I was just thinking, okay, a personalized track into Risque insurance. That sounds fun. And then you mentioned the pictures, and I'm like, no, nope, mm-mm.
I was going through a divorce at the time, right? I was ready for anything.
That's awesome. Well, let's kind of talk about what it is. I mean, Ashley said the words that I couldn't say, but let's talk about some of the markets that are the most interesting ones. Or maybe instead of going through all the markets, because anybody could go to the PPIB. So it's almost hard to say the PPIB website, and they can see the different markets that you had. Maybe let's start with what's the most shocking or awkward exposure, like, first off, does anything shock you anymore?
This is where I'll come in to start talking to you when you talk, because she won't be able to.
I will say this, goodness, there are a number of things that still might not be my cup of tea or might not be something I plan on participating in, but not much shocks me anymore. I will say in fact, it's even something that we have to, when we interview new hires, we have to have the conversation about how easily offended are you? Because we're really going to need to know that this may not be the place for you to work if you can't say penis out loud.
Oh
Like,
gosh.
Yeah. I told you. Don't worry, I'm tapping
I've been
in.
kicked out on round one.
I'm tapping in. We're good.
but I think the for me, the most surprising, I guess, was learning a bit more about maybe interests that are not something I was exposed to. So especially in the piercing world, right? The one that still gets me a little bit are suspension piercings.
Oh, yeah.
Let's just say don't Google it before lunch. It's not maybe for the faint of heart. But right in the piercing world, this is a completely normal thing and something
Hmm.
that needs to be able to be insured. And so that has been a really interesting journey to understand. We dive deep into what are the things that make this industry unique? What's the worst case scenario that could happen? And then how do we cover that? What are we okay with and what are we not okay with? And like I said, there's not a whole lot we're not okay with.
So that's interesting because it's like I can understand where you'd have to cover the person that's doing the piercing. So let's say I'm a suspension piercing artist and I think I know what you're talking about. It's pretty self-explanatory. But then what happens with great, so the piercing is done, it's healed fully, it was done properly the way it was supposed to be, and now I'm actually putting it into use and something happens. Is there still liability that I can come back on the piercer and be like, well, you did this wrong, even though they might have done it perfectly fine?
Well, it depends, right? Because anybody can sue anyone for anything.
Right,
And
right.
that is the reason that insurance exists and it does so well, right? Is because we have very creative people here in the US. But it is something,
Creative. We'll go with creative.
yeah. Uh it's something that for sure you could come back and try to say, right, that they were negligent should something happen. It doesn't mean that they're going to actually get paid, but a lot of what we experience in this industry is really defense costs, right? Because you have to still defend against
Hmm.
the allegation of wrongdoing. And no one likes to take personal responsibility. So it's always someone else's fault. And so they will come back and say, hey, this happened and this tore or whatever it was. I mean, going down the other path, what's really interesting to me is this whole, again, maybe not something I plan on doing, but the whole vajazzling thing is common, I guess, before, like, your wedding night?
Okay, wait. So again, because I don't have filters, and this is why I'm never going to be a co-host again, because they're probably going to fire me after this one. So, I love the word vajazzle because I feel like I would typically say that and like in a joking manner, obviously. But when you're saying that it's common before wedding nights, I'm thinking it's more than just like, okay, you're going and getting a piercing. Are we talking like they're literally putting like gemstones? Like what is,
but
can
not
you,
permanently, not permanently.
right. Okay. So it is literally like bedazzling, but for your
Uh-huh.
vagina. Okay.
Exactly. 100%.
See,
And
this just sounds like so many things could go wrong. Like, what if they fall off? And it just sounds like so many things could go wrong.
personally, it just sounds like it hurts. But again, everybody has their own choice. On the bright side, we don't really get too many requests for pajazzling, so I think we're good there.
All right. So, okay, I think everyone has a clear idea of what the types of things that you're insuring, which I love. And we can keep talking about that, but I need Dustin to stop laughing. So I'm gonna switch gears for a second here. So can you talk about any claims that have come through besides the obvious of, okay, maybe somebody did a tattoo and it got infected, or a piercing? I mean, at one point, I was trying to think about this coming on here. Like at one point, I had 11 piercings. One of them did not go well. None of them were inappropriate. So everyone get your minds out of the gutters. But like one of them did scar, and I'm not thrilled with it, but I would never go back to them and be like, this is your fault, because it probably was my fault and I didn't take care of it or something. So what are some crazy claims that have come through that you're like, I just don't understand?
Well, I will say you know, especially when you're tattooing, when you get a tattoo, you have to sign off on the design, right? The artist shows you what is going to happen. Typically, they'll even place it on your body and have you sign off and say, in fact, this is what I want, right? Not everybody understands
Oh no. Oh no. Tell me it's the mirror.
mirrors. No, like just how mirrors
Yep.
adjust things.
Yep.
So we did have one claim where the guy was very, very upset because the Mexican flag was tattooed backwards,
Oh no.
and he signed off on it because in the mirror it looked right to him.
Yep.
I feel like in this day and age, Google really helps with spelling. Like,
I was gonna say this is like the commercial of no regrets or whatever.
it
Uh-huh.
exactly is. So there was a rather large gentleman who wanted resurrection across from one shoulder all the way to the other shoulder on his back, and nobody thought to spell check that first.
I'm going back on mute.
That is a very long process to get that. Now, granted, we were not necessarily liable because the guy signed off on it and said, "Sure,
Exactly.
here you go." But we are, we haven't had a claim yet, but I had, one of the things that I spend a lot of my time doing is specialty wordings, right? Because this is not something that ISO has figured out how to properly cover. So we do a lot of bespoke wordings for these programs. And I I don't know why, had I guess a premonition when we were writing some of these wordings a few years back, updating them. And I had said, you can tattoo anywhere on the body except for the eyeballs. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, where where would tattoo be off limits? Okay, the skin does pretty well, but eyeballs are not skin, so we probably don't want to be covering that. And the other day we got asked if in fact we could cover that. And I was like, yeah, that crosses my line, Dustin. That's beyond the line of something we're gonna do.
I saw it on Instagram. I saw a guy tattoo his eyes.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah,
I've
it's different.
talked to me. You mentioned that I can handle this part. Let's talk about ISO. No, you mentioned that you spend a lot of time customizing language. What does it take educationally or experientially for you? Because I imagine, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that even ISO has to go back and do minor revisions to their language because you end up accidentally covering something that you didn't mean to, or you end up accidentally excluding something that you didn't mean to. And then when you get into a claim, of course, the court's interpretation of what it is. So, talk to me about what it takes to get involved in customizing language.
That is definitely I think it's one of the hardest things to do. I am not an attorney, by any stretch of the imagination, nor have I any attorney training. But I feel like I speak legalese pretty well just from experience. And so, what we do is we partner with associations and experts in the field especially when we're trying something new, or heaven forbid, in medi spas, every 2 months they come out with a new way to torture your body
Oh
in
gosh.
the vein of beauty. So we work with people that know these procedures inside and out and that can help work with us on what's contraindicated, what the big risk factors are, and then figuring out how we want to either cover or exclude those. It's certainly not, I don't write these by myself and not get sign off. It's, with our carriers wordings group, but a lot of times we'll suggest the wording and then they clean it up and do all the legalese behind the scenes and help us out. But it is interesting, and in fact, that court interpretation is absolutely a thing. We have There's a procedure called eyebrow threading, right? Where instead of waxing or plucking whatever, you can use threads to pluck the eyebrows. And so we had included this in our beauty program under, a basic aesthetic procedures. This is not something that has a whole lot of risk to it, something that we were very concerned about. But over time, medi spas started offering something called PDO threading, which is where they attach a thread from kind of the bottom of your cheek to the top of your cheek and pull up
It
the
pulls your
cheeks
face
so
up.
that they are so that you have those nice little apple cheeks, and they're dissolvable threads, so they don't stay in you forever. They last, I think, 6 to 12 months. But one of our clients saw that we covered threading in our aesthetics section, and there's a big difference between using a thread to pluck eyebrows and putting a semi-permanent thread in your
Hmm.
cheeks. And so that was a claim that got turned in. She had, something went wrong with a PDO thread, and she thought that she should have coverage because it said aesthetics. So it's a good, it's not just okay to write them once, right? But it is going back and then realizing that if you called something, threading back in the time period, that was the only meaning of the word. Now, fast forward to today, we now have to be very specific about eyebrow threading or hair threading separate to PDO threading, and this does
Wow.
not mean that. So it has been kind of an interesting experience to see how language morphs over time.
That is very interesting. I'm very intrigued by that process. Let's talk. Okay, so obviously, I would not only not be a good candidate for being hired by PPIB, but also understanding that agents, and this is what calls to mind. I redid a course here at the National Alliance that included some emerging risk topics. One of the topics being cannabis from the personal lines aspect. Now, it's not considered an emerging risk in every state, but just that factor going between state legalization and federal non legalization, there's still this emerging issue of, what happens and when. Well, one of the feedback that we got on it was somebody that's probably very similar to me in terms of has difficulty saying certain words, but their feedback was that they don't agree with the use of cannabis, so that they're just not going to write it and they're not going to ask their clients about it. And my response back was, I respect that, but your client may not share the same, and you're leaving them open to an exposure if you're not asking them about it at least. So my question here is that agents may either go out and seek these opportunities, because I would have a feeling, I don't know, maybe it's my own feeling, that not a lot of agents are actively seeking such clientele if they aren't actively involved in such services. So it's probably like you don't have a lot of competition there. Or maybe you're an agent and somebody in your book of business decides, I'm going to start doing this. And they call you and say, I'm doing this. And you suddenly, the cat's got your tongue. How do you or professional program insurance brokerage help maybe educate or navigate, or help the agent navigate, learn how to ask the right questions in these situations?
Oh, absolutely. So And it is you're correct. There are some agents that will focus on, medi spa or cosmetic industries, but they're few and far between. I don't think that that's something, you know, most people end up with us because they have tried going down the street to their standard retail agent who does their home, auto, life, whatever it is, and they say, and I run a fill in the blank, and that agent may or may not be, deer in the headlights and not sure what to do. I will say this, we will happily take any retail agent who finds themselves in that situation. We don't have like a minimum premium requirement or a minimum policy count requirement. If you have that one client you don't know what to do with, we're happy to help you. But I think where we help agents out is that, similar to ISO not really providing much help for some of these services or coverages, Accord forms don't really do much in the way of asking useful questions for anything that we insure.
or anything, period.
That's
Sorry.
another topic, Ash.
That's my own personal opinion too, but no, we actually refuse to accept Accord forms simply for that reason, is that they don't ask anything that's
And
helpful.
you just got a whole bunch of agents signing up because you said that you refused Accord forms just then. Just
I just wanna know how many people out there actually own private aircraft and that you need to ask about that on every single application, because that's clearly your normal American. So we actually have customized applications that only ask the questions you need to ask. So that for these industries, if the question's on our application, we care about it, and so it's important. And if it's not, then we left it off. So every single thing we do is asking them to work with their client and answer certain questions about training, about safety practices, about risk mitigation, about things, what services they do, and making sure that they're told what the limitations are on that. So we're happy to always talk to an agent on the phone about that, but our application kind of pre-screens it for them so they can pick up that application and they can actually use that to ask the client the right questions.
Okay, I have so many questions. Tell me if I'm off base on this, because I mean, I've been in insurance for 15 years. I was heavily on the personal lines, but I did some commercial lines, but not anything like this. But also, being a woman who has had piercings and has had Botox and has had every facial procedure, not everyone, but lots of facial procedures done, in my brain, and I've had tattoos, I would think that like a med spa would be a higher risk than tattoo or piercing place, because like I'm just thinking about the stuff you can get done your face now, like PRP or whatever, where they take the blood and re-inject it under your eyes, and like, and even just like a chemical peel, like if God forbid that goes wrong and you are peeling your face off, like I would think that that's a higher risk than a tattoo shop. What do you see? What are your thoughts on that?
So I would say this one, stereotypes aside from 30 years ago when only sailors and inmates got tattoos, right? And it's clearly a much more widely accepted practice nowadays. It is interesting. Medi spas can be more problematic depending on where they're at. So I would still rather eat off of a floor in a tattoo or piercing shop than in any medical facility ever,
oh.
because the standards tend to be, and I apologize out there to any of the medi spas, but just my experience is that tattoo and piercing shops take that hygiene very, very seriously. And not that medi spas don't, it's just a different level of attention. I don't know. But in medi spas, the biggest thing is, depending on your state, depends upon what you can do under your license and whether you need a medical designation. So in some states, like California, there are certain procedures you can't do unless you're an RN or above. And in theory, that means that you have gone through all of this additional training on humans and their bodies and how they react and what's okay and what's not okay. And so adding in a service that is then treating skin in some manner or tissue doesn't seem like such a stretch. And in fact, we do see less claims here in California, but we write this nationwide. And I'm going to pick on New York. They seem to be very confused about what's needs to be licensed, what doesn't. In fact, right now we're going through this whole thing where there's no law saying you have to be licensed, but the medical board has come out and said, here's a chart of where you need a license, but it's not actually written anywhere. And we're trying to figure out the middle of
Oh
that
gosh.
and who's right, who's wrong. But they, for a long time, have not required a license for certain laser procedures, which means that you or I could decide that we would like to quit our day job and we would like to go get just a simple esthetician training and we could go do laser hair removal in New York. And that clearly causes a whole lot of claims for us, which is why we actually impose stricter requirements for training before we'll insure somebody out there than they do. They are working we're actually working right now with some lobbyists, that are trying to get licensing required for laser in New York because I think it's so important that people be properly trained before they use a dangerous tool on somebody.
For sure.
But it is just interesting. It depends on the state really for whether I think that's a higher risk or not.
Okay, that's a very good point because I guess I wasn't even obviously, and I've been to tattoo parlors and I've gotten tattoos, and yes, they do take it very seriously with all the cleaning and what you're laying on and all that stuff. So I never even thought like, oh yeah, that's probably cleaner than I hate to say it, some places that give you Groupons online. Listen, anybody listening right now, I am a research freak. If you're going to plan on getting Botox or any sort of dermal fillers, and I'm not a doctor, so you don't have to listen to me, but please don't get a Groupon. If they're on Groupon, does that make you feel comfortable? I feel like that's just screaming no regrets. Like you're waiting to have like a crooked like the one I forgot there was some poor lady and it wasn't her Botox person's fault, but she did it and she didn't follow the precautions after. Like you're not supposed to lay down because it can move. And she had like a lazy eye for like the next 6 weeks because it moved and it pulled her eye down. And I'm like, well, you know what? Maybe you should have gotten a Groupon.
Oh my gosh.
I will say that we also are big proponents of maybe don't get laser hair removal from some place that has a huge group on because that
Yeah.
does require a certain skill.
Oh my gosh. You have, okay, so you started with a history in personal lines and now you're in this market. And just listening to you talk has been fascinating because you've got a sense of knowledge in not only the insurance side of it, but also the language development of it. And as well as like, it almost sounds like you should have a background in medicine or medical stuff. Where do you go? What do you do? What is your methodology, in other words, for staying informed on not only the insurance side, but all this medical stuff too? Like, are you sitting around reading medical journals all day long?
No, no, thankfully I don't have that much free time. Although I don't know, my youngest just turned 18, so maybe. I think staying like we do I subscribe to a number of industry publications in the spa and tattoo and, medi spa type world. And those publications are typically really good at talking about the next, you know, best and greatest thing that is going to be all the rage. Interesting though, most of the time when we see something new coming up or trying to stay on the cutting edge, it's actually our clients that let us know because they're really good about calling
Oh, good.
and saying, "So I'm about to start offering this. Am I covered for it?" At least those that read their policy and pay attention to insurance, which is a whole nother conversation. But a lot of times they'll be the ones that'll say, "Here's what's coming out. Here's how we do the procedure. Here is what we want to be able to be covered for." So we really do lean on our clients that are the experts in the field, right? I don't ever want to think that I know more than someone who has been trained how to do something, but I'm really good at being a sponge and learning. I will say, in addition to that, reaching out to our experts or associations that we have in that industry and just saying, hey, does this sound right? Does this ring true for you? Have you seen this before? Is there something we're not considering? And then my favorite search tool still on top of that is Google. because you discover quite a bit
What do you
just in
Google?
well, right, but, like, what the procedure name is, and what's interesting is what Google deems relevant, right, rises to the top. So if in fact there's been a whole bunch of lawsuits on something already, or if in fact there has been a whole lot of warning about, "Oh my god, I did this and ended up with this horrible thing," those are the top results that Google brings back when you do that. So it's really interesting to see what Google deems as relevant because it's searching thousands and, hundreds of thousands of different documents and websites and things to pull this together. So a lot of times I actually look at that more so to be like, okay, what do I watch out for? What are the things that people are already screaming about or yelling about? And then a number of the things that we insure on the more medical side have to be regulated by the FDA. So that's the other, I'm checking with the FDA, seeing what they say about it, where they're at on it, whether it's actually this device has been approved. There's a lot of various places I go.
I'm just sitting here because Easter is right around the corner, and I come from a very big insurance family, and my grandfather, my grandmother, my dad, my uncle, and we all sit around the table and I mean, insurance is life. It doesn't shut off. And I could just imagine sitting there around like the Easter ham and like, I can only imagine how these conversations would go. Oh my God.
Why do I feel like you and your family would have a whole conversation at Easter?
You know, that is
about
really
it?
sad. We probably have had that conversation before because it probably started about my mom throwing away my bedazzler, which she did like only like a year ago. And I kid you not, 2 weeks after she threw it away, I'm like, Mom, do we still have that bedazzler? She goes, I knew you would ask me for it as soon as I threw it away. So I'm sure that it probably escalated very quickly from that to some
Well, it
conversation.
sounds like
along
this
those
is
lines.
going to be a really interesting Easter day for you. I will say it does provide some interesting conversations around our dinner table too.
Listen, I gotta go
Um,
find my inhaler after this episode.
I will say when my oldest became, of legal age and decided he wanted to go get a tattoo, I don't think anybody's ever researched that artist more and, tried to make sure they had insurance and did all the proper things. It's like, you go do you, that's fine, but at least let your mom make sure that they're following all the stuff.
This has been a conversation. I don't know what kind of conversation, but it has been a conversation. Is there anything that we've left undazzled? I'm trying to come up with something here. Is there anything we've left uncovered that you'd love for other people to know? Maybe just how to connect with you or Professional Program Insurance Brokerage? Because I have a feeling that some people in this hard market might be like, I am out of PNC. I'm going to the dazzling side of insurance.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, they can certainly reach us at ppibcorp.com and take a look at all the different programs we offer. I think more than anything, I love this part because there's no boring day.
Bet.
Every day is different here. I never know what's going to pop in my emails or what, staff members going to come up and say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" and talking it through. But more than anything, I think it's just that if someone out there also has an idea for a program where you need this kind of level of depth and trying to figure out how to help your clients, we love doing that stuff. Like that is what we live and breathe for. And I would not go back to my former insurance life for anything now that I've been spoiled by, fun insurance.
Now that your life has been bedazzled.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for joining us today, Susan. I'm so happy that this was your first podcast ever.
Absolutely. It's quite the initiation. Thank you very much for having me.
Woo! Toodles, everybody. Oh, my cheeks hurt.
Oh my goodness.
Thanks for hanging out and listening to another awkward insurance conversation.
If you haven't already, be sure to join the Awkward Insurance Facebook community. We have an amazing group of people on there.
And for more episodes, head over to the National Alliance website at scic.com. Now go forth and be awkward. Toodles!
That's awkward.